You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is... Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Eleanor Brown on the show with me. She has an amazing new book. It is heartwarming and touching, and it's such a pleasure to read. And I know this is going to be a kind of like comfort food of a book for a lot of people. I loved it so much. I know you will too. It's called Any Other Family, and I'm so excited to talk about it today. Welcome to the show, Eleanor.
Thank you so much for having me, Hank. I'm glad to be here.
I'm excited as well. Eleanor, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
So I was almost late to talk to you because I was looking for a visual aid
I love
that
it.
I still have. So I was always an avid reader and I really enjoyed writing. But in sixth grade, I had a teacher who just really encouraged that in me and praised me. And at the end of the year, I wrote a story for some assignment, and it was probably the worst thing I'd written that year, but bless her heart, she still she said something to the effect of, I think you could be a real writer someday. And I have such a strong memory of reading that and thinking, really? Like, that's a thing I could do? And from there, I feel like reading is always going to be my first love. But when I got the idea that I could sort of be part of creating these things, that was really the beginning of my career as a writer.
Sixth grade is such a magical time. What are you, like 11, 12?
Yeah.
You're just on the cusp of being a teenager, and a lot of the kind of childish silliness is working its way
there.
out.
Yep.
It's still there, but you're on the cusp of a big life change. It feels like. And I've heard so many people say that they had this sort of writing awakening around that same time. There's something interesting about that time. I can't quite put my finger on it, but you are not alone in having that sort of experience around that time.
Yeah, I believe it. I taught seventh grade for years and years and years.
My son teaches sixth grade English.
Oh, he does?
Yes.
Well, it's funny because, I would look at, after teaching seventh grade for a few years, you look at the sixth graders and I would just think, they're babies. They're such little babies. And they would come to me at the beginning of the year, seventh grade, and they were still little babies. And by the end, they were starting to be, like you're saying, actual fully formed humans. But it's that point at which I feel like the tunnel vision of childhood starts to open up. And some of that's a little bit, difficult and damaging, but it's when you start to consider more possibilities. So I think it's a super exciting time, and it doesn't surprise me at all that I'm not the only one.
Yeah. So from having that moment in the sixth grade where you feel like your writing career began there or began to begin there, however you want to look at it, to publishing your first book. A lot of times we know early on that this is a path that we want to take, but life gets in the way, and we get married and we start raising a family, and we have jobs where we have to pay bills and all these responsibilities, but writing always has a way of coming back around and knocking on the door again. What was that experience like for you?
I never stopped writing. It was something that I was always passionate about. I kind of did everything for work, and I feel like that's the best preparation for becoming a writer. My first job out of college, I was a wedding coordinator and I have so many crazy stories from that. And like I said, I taught 7th grade, and I have even more crazy stories from that. And so I guess it just, there's part of writing that is just about living and being out in the world and having experiences so that you have emotional experiences and thoughts and ideas to draw on. So, so it was always something like publication was always a goal that I had. But it was also kind of just about exploring things and figuring out all these experiences I was having. And then my first book didn't get published for a very long time after 6th grade. I think at one time I sort of had an ambition to be the next S.E. Hinton, and have published My Outsiders at 16. But I'm kind of glad I didn't, because as I said, I just had so many experiences and so much more emotion to draw on when I did start writing stuff that I thought was actually good enough to put out into the world.
It's funny that you say that, because I've met a lot of writers, and a few of them have been just phenoms and wrote amazing, life-changing novels, in their 20s.
Yeah.
For most of us, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
We need that extra experience and things to draw upon. And writing is one of those careers that sometimes it's better to come to later in life than to break in early. And it doesn't feel that way when you're trying to break in your 20s and nothing is working. But then when you're in your 30s or 40s and you look back and you say, oh, now I understand why that needed to happen. You said you needed more experience to draw from. Was there anything in particular that you can look back on and say, this was one of those life-shaping experiences that made me a better writer?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Let me jump back for a second and just
Sure.
on something you just said, that I think that it's additionally hard in this culture that fetishizes success in general and early success, all of those like 20 under 30 lists and things like that. And it's like, why is that a thing, right? Like, why are we pushing people? Why are we pushing people to do that? I met a writer a few years ago at a book festival in South Carolina named Anna Jean Mayhew, and she published her first novel, which was lovely, and she was 73. And it was like, why are we in a rush? Why are we in a hurry to do this? You're going to get there when you get there, and that's exactly the right time for you to be there. As far as personal experiences, I think I had to screw up a lot. And I think I had to reckon with a lot of my screw ups. I had an early marriage and an early divorce, and just, I don't know, was like your normal 20-something idiot. And and like, I love her because she brought me where I am today. But I think that heartbreak that I caused myself and all the things that I did that I'm not happy about or proud of anymore, they were something that I could then look back on and be like, well, why are you so miserable, Eleanor? Oh, maybe it's because you made yourself that way. And why is it that you made yourself that way? So it's just that, I guess it's a combination of stupidity and reflection, right?
Yeah.
That gets you there. And, God bless like the people who get there earlier. There's this novel out right now that everybody's buzzing about. I think it's called Night Beast. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's by this 19-year-old former poet laureate. And, God love her. I'm sorry that she had such a hard early life, that she had that much heartbreak to write about, but great for her that she was able to put it into words. But like, she hasn't gotten anywhere faster. There's no prize, right? I think about this saying all the time with my son, who's 4, like, there's no prize for finishing childhood early, right? Like, if he doesn't learn to read when he's 4, who cares? There's no prize for finishing childhood early. And how many, like, young phenoms do we know who just burned out and ended up miserable? It takes the time it takes.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think so many people are hearing this from you, and that's resonating with them. I think your experience is, while it's your experience, is not a solitary experience.
Right.
I think that speaks for so many people. We're all idiots. Well, most of us were idiots in our 20s. I can't say all, but a lot of us were. I know I was nodding my head, as you were saying that, for sure.
The key is just to be a reflective idiot,
Yes,
right?
yes. Get to the point in life where you can look back and go, "Oh, that was me."
Lousy idea. Yeah.
Oh, I was my own worst enemy. Got it.
Right. Right. Well, and you're going to continue to be your own worst enemy for the rest of your life, so you might as well learn that early.
Embrace it. Yeah, run with it. Your first novel that you published, The Light of Paris.
No, first novel was The Weird Sisters.
Oh, I'm sorry, The Weird Sisters.
That's okay.
Where did that book come from? What was the and you said you did not publish the first novel that you had written. Did I understand that right? Okay.
No.
So
No.
what was it about this novel that was different from the things you had done in the book? I love to ask people about this, because for so many people, the first thing that is published is not the first thing that they wrote. But when they were writing that first thing, I know for a lot of people that, anytime you're writing a novel, it feels so immediate. It feels so important to you. And, everyone's got to read this story. And sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And, you have to come to the point where, you're able to let go of this story to then start digging up what the next story is. Now, looking back on The Weird Sisters, versus the novel that came before it that didn't go out to the world, can you see where the growth was in you that made this book sellable and publishable?
So, yeah, I mean, I think that, again, going back to this question of like our rush and of youth, and I will just sort of take a brief tangent, but as my father always says, the tangent connects to the circle.
Right.
And just say that, again, this whole question of like success, we're so success driven, and I wrote this thing and so everybody has to read it. Well, no, that's not the case, right? I mean, publication is not the end all be all. Like, trust me, I will tell you, publication is not the end all be all. It's just the start of a bunch of new headaches. And there are wonderful things about it. And that moment of connection, you saying your experience is solitary, but you're not alone.
Sure.
I feel like that's the power of writing, right? But you don't have to publish in order to do that. But so I think about apprenticeships, right? And in olden times, you would become apprentice to a blacksmith. And you made your first horseshoe, and you didn't run right out and put that horseshoe on a horse, right? Because it was probably not a very good horseshoe, and you would have made the horse very uncomfortable. And so I kind of feel like there's this apprenticeship period in writing, and it's something that you put so much time and energy in, and it represents time away from the people you love and other things that you want to be doing. And so it's very hard not to be like, I made a thing. Pay attention to the thing that I made. But your apprenticeship is not necessarily something that you need to share. And so for me, really, it's for everyone else's protection that I don't share the work that I did in my apprenticeship. You said the novel you wrote before The Weird Sisters was published. That would be novels, plural, that I wrote before The Weird Sisters was published. And that was my apprenticeship. And I was learning and failing better. And so I guess the difference with The Weird Sisters was that, I mean, one, I had done enough work that I felt confident in my abilities at that point.
Yeah.
It wasn't just I made a thing, but it was like I made a good thing. And I think that what I have to say in this thing is something that would be beneficial to other people.
Right.
To connect with. And that was indeed very much the case with The Weird Sisters. And then the other part of it, I think I already said the other part of it. Yeah, it didn't suck. Like I wasn't ashamed to send it out. I spent a fair amount of time on it, and I think that one of the keys to it was that I didn't write it with an eye towards publication. It was kind of like, oh, this is interesting, and this is interesting, and this is interesting, and I'm just going to have a good time doing this. It was just my hobby. It was just something that I did for fun, and I'd put in enough wrench time learning how to write a book that it was finally ready for other people to read.
I think we attach some odd emotions to writing because writing is most of the time most people are writing for publication, and there's almost a monetary value that we assign to our hobby. And I remember having a conversation with Brandon Sanderson, the fantasy writer, one time, and he had written 13 novels before he ever published his first one. And he said, I've always found it odd because if someone loves to play basketball and they go, to their neighborhood gym, one night a week or something, and they play with all of their friends, we don't expect them to join the NBA. And we're not asking them every week, well, are there any scouts looking at you? No, you're going because this is a thing that you enjoy. And why can't we do the same with writing? Why can't it be something we enjoy? Of course, that you can always publish if you want to, and there's multiple avenues for that now, but it doesn't have to be that way.
No, and I do think, and I do appreciate the breadth of writers that you have on the show, talking about different ways that they do this, because I say this when I was mentoring writers, I would say, well, here are all the different options ahead of you. Very often, I would have writers come to me who wanted to write memoir. And memoir is tricky because it's like I went through this experience and it was difficult. And really what they want to say is I survived this, and they want recognition for that. And I always ask them, it's like, okay, well, the odds of you becoming, Cheryl Strayed or Jeanette Walls, are very, very small. So let's talk about what would make the difference for you. Like, what if you just wrote this thing so that you figured it out? Right, for yourself? Or what if you just wrote this thing and you published it in very small format so you could share it with your family and friends so that you feel like you're heard and understood, right? Understanding that nobody's under any obligation to read what you write, no matter how passionately you feel about it. But I think about that all the time. We don't go to the dentist once and then say, oh, I've been through this experience and now I can be a dentist, right? It's just this weird thing we have where we're all literate, and we all have stories to share. And it's really important to be heard, right? It's really important to be able to share and articulate your experiences and to be heard in that way. So I don't want to denigrate it, but I think you're right that this weird capitalist assumption that we have that everything has to be financial and, driven by success is kind of sad, because I feel like when you're constantly writing, Stephen King talks about writing with the door closed versus writing with the door open.
Right.
I feel like if you're always thinking about that end result, you're always writing with the door open, and that will really damage your work. That's actually probably what I should have said about the Weird Sisters, is I finally wrote the Weird Sisters with the door closed.
I love it.
Because it wasn't for anybody but me. And I think that's why it was better than anything I'd written before.
I'm glad you brought up writing memoir, because your new book, Any Other Family, is not a memoir. Let's just put that. It's a novel, but I understand that it's influenced by some real life experiences. One thing that's interesting about memoir is memoirs are rarely the story of a fantastic weekend that someone had. And let me just tell you about all the great times we had. Memoirs rarely mine that sort of emotion. Why do you think that is for memoir, and how come it's easier to write fiction around maybe some stories with a more positive outcome? We'll just put it that way.
Sure. So, yeah, well, I mean, any story has to have difficulty in it, right? Our cultural expectation of story, the hero's journey, narrative structure, we're going to expect some difficulty because there's just not that much story. In my second novel, The Light of Paris, there were a lot of people who said to me, like, I just hated the main character at the beginning. She was so unhappy. I was like, well, of course she's unhappy. Like,
it's a journey.
No, it was like, my life is great. I had a super fun weekend. That's the end of the book. They have to have somewhere to go.
Right.
I think, memoir is very tricky. I have another Colorado writer. Her name is Erica Krause. She's a fiction writer, but she just published a wonderful memoir called Tell Me Everything. And she talked about how she'd never written memoir before because she'd never had a life experience that sort of very clearly fell into that narrative structure. Right. And then she had this experience and she was like, oh, here we go. There's the beginning and the rising action and the false climax and the climax and the denouement. And so she was finally able to write it in that way. And I think that that's one reason that people struggle a lot with memoir is that they've had some sort of experience, but it's very hard to fit it within the confines of our cultural expectation of story. And in fiction, and then there's like this whole layer of writing memoir that's about being honest with yourself, and recognizing that you are not necessarily, like, you're the hero of your own story, but you're not necessarily the hero of everybody else's story. And that requires an incredible amount of personal, insight and objectivity. And then in fiction, you get to make something up. So yeah, Any Other Family was inspired by some real life events in my life, but so was The Light of Paris and so was The Weird Sisters. But the difference in fiction is that I get to take that germ and then grow it into something completely different. Why did I say germ? I should have said seed. I take that seed and grow it into something entirely different and new, and I can make it as funny or as sad as I want to be.
So tell us about Any Other Family. What is the where do we find these characters when we drop into the story?
Sure. So Any Other Family is the story of three sets of parents who become a family of their own when they adopt biological siblings. And at the beginning of this novel, they are going on what they call the first annual family vacation, where they're all going up to Aspen, Colorado, all the parents, all the kids, to spend 2 weeks together. They say that there's only two stories: people go on a trip or a stranger comes to town.
Right.
I like I like a combination of both, I think. I'm very big on the Ship of Fools story, so I like to cram everybody together in a confined space and make them fight it out for a little while. Yeah, so that's where they all are. And then they get a call from the children's birth mother saying that she's pregnant again and she wants to make a plan for adoption, and she wants them to choose this expected child's new parents.
There's so much wrapped up in this story. Adoption is beautiful and wonderful and to be commended all around. It also can be very sticky for lots of reasons. There are reasons why there are closed adoptions and where the adoptive parents just really sever all contact with the birth parents and there's no communication there, and a lot of times they don't even know of the other's existence, and then there are open adoptions where all of these people are still in each other's lives, and it's an extremely beautiful thing if that can work. Where the child benefits from it, and all of the parents benefit from it as well. And then you add the extra layer of multiple families adopting um, uh, children that are all siblings, and all stay connected. Where did this idea come from to just add layer upon layer of complexity for this family?
Well, so this is the fun of writing fiction, right?
Right.
It started because I'm an adoptive mom. My son is 4 years old. We have an open adoption with his birth parents, with really his entire birth family.
Wow.
And it's a very open adoption. We see his birth parents regularly. And it's really it works for us, and it's wonderful. He's 4, so I don't know what the future holds, and it's going to
Sure.
be difficult at times in the future, I have no doubt. But family is difficult,
Yeah.
which is really one of the things that I write about in this story, is like this family has this particular type of difficulty because they are adoptive families, but they are also just family. So when I would talk to people about the open adoption, I just got such interesting I just got such interesting responses from people. So, open adoption is, as a norm, is relatively new. And as you said, it is not always possible or advisable, right? I mean, sometimes there are reasons where a family has had parental rights terminated. Sometimes there are reasons to separate the children. I talk a little bit about that in the book, like why it might be better that the kids are not necessarily, all being parented by the same parents.
Sure.
But just the responses I would get were so strange, because I feel like closed adoption and even secret adoption, right, where kids found out that they were adopted when they were 18 or older, and people are still discovering their biological families through ancestry.com or whatever. It's just, I don't know, it's so complicated. And so people would say sometimes really terrible things. Like, I could never do that, or isn't your son confused about who his parents are? And I'm like, well, are you confused when you spend time? Were you confused when you spend time with your parents and your grandparents? No, you have totally different relationships with them, right? So anyway, so I started with just sort of the questions I had about adoption and motherhood and parenting and, other parents that I saw going through these experiences, other people in the adoption community that I talked to. And I just started layering it all together. And when you're writing fiction, basically you're just trying to say, how can I make these people's lives as difficult as possible so that they can learn something from it and come out on the other end with some kind of better understanding of who they are and who the people around them are. And so I just kept adding those layers of complexity onto it until I had this very complicated family that I could build a story around.
Because you are an adoptive parent, and they're obviously, and I have no idea if there are or not, but I would assume that there are situations in the book that have been informed by your real life situations in one way or another. As you're writing this, a lot of times writing is us kind of working out some things of our own that play out in characters. Did you ever have an experience in writing this and have an epiphany of sorts that the act of writing allowed you to kind of work through something?
I don't know. I don't know that I ever come to answers. Like, I always come to writing a book with questions.
Yeah. And you wind up with more questions at the end.
Right. So like the Weird Sisters, I came to with this question of sort of like, what are the forces that shape us? What makes us into the people we are, and how does family affect that? With The Light of Paris, it was about where does your loyalty lie? Like, what's the balance between your loyalty to other people and your loyalty to yourself? And what does it mean to sort of be honest with yourself and yet take care of other people at the same time. And then with this, I think I just came with a lot of really ill-formed questions about adoption and motherhood. And I don't know that I came to any sort of epiphany at the end. I think with my books, I tend to come to a sort of peace with things.
I like that.
Where it was like, okay, I thought about these things. I can't tell you after writing The Weird Sisters, what are the forces that shape us? It's complicated, right?
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, if I had an epiphany at the end of writing Any Other Family, it would be like, family's complicated.
Mhm.
I think it was very interesting. I talked to a lot of other adoptive parents. I talked to adult adoptees. I had some interesting conversations with even other kids, when they would find out that my son is adopted, and kind of what we would talk about that. So I feel like those things wormed them in there. But as I always say about my writing, people ask how much of this is, quote, real, like how much of this is true.
Right.
And I say more than I intended and less than you think.
I like that.
There's very little in Any Other Family that is true about my adoptive family.
Right.
And there's so much that's true about it.
The one set of stars of the book, if you want to look at it that way, are the children, obviously, that are adopted. But what I really loved about this book is the glimpse into the way different people parent, and the way that they come to be parents, and the way they embrace the role of parenting, and how they grow as parents throughout the story. My wife and I have 5 kids, and who are all grown now. Our oldest is the 6th grade English teacher that I told you about, and our youngest it just turned 18. So all of our children are grown now for all intents and purposes. But we were very different parents with our firstborn, our oldest son, than we are with our lastborn, our youngest son. We were. We experimented everything with our oldest son because we didn't know what we were doing, and by the time we got to our last, we were either just worn out and tired, or had matured, however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
So we, as a singular couple, parenting through 5 children that are all live with us, and we could see our own growth, and it was fascinating to see these different sets of parents to this sibling group of children, and how they all come to it. That had to be one of the funnest parts of writing this book, was just exploring different types of parenting and how people come to it, and then how they each grow through this experience.
Yeah, it was fun. It was interesting because really what this is about is, so I mean, there's the part that you're talking about, which is just kind of learning to be a parent, right?
Yeah.
And I would say every child in a family grows up in a different family, right? That oldest child has the experience of being an only child. They are the first, we always talk about how, I was the 3rd child. So by the time they got to me, they were like, oh, she can eat dirt. She'll be fine. Because they will, right?
Exactly. But that first one you're running and that first one you're running and scalding a pacifier every time it touches the floor, and
right. The last one you're like, yeah, whatever, they're fine.
Yeah. It won't kill them.
And there are benefits and losses to that, right?
Of course.
And so but also everybody just kind of brings who they are and brings their baggage with them to parenting. And that is something I think that's very clear in Any Other Family, is like, you don't stop being a human being when you become a parent, right?
Right.
It's like I say when I talk about The Weird Sisters, nobody ever feels like a grown up. You're still just the same broken person trying to do your best, and trying to help your kids through this experience. So I have Tabitha, who's kind of the leader of the parents, and she's wound very tight. She had this very lonely, only childhood experience. And so she is determined that that they're going to be a real family, like a big, happy family together. And you can guess how everybody else feels about that and how that goes. But, there's a perfect example of trying to work out we try to work out our own issues on our kids instead of working on ourselves.
Right.
And then there is Ginger, who had this very peripatetic kind of, not out of control, but she was never in control in her childhood. And so she's very wary of other people, and she wants to hold people at arm's length. And then there is Elizabeth, because this book, the main characters of this book really are the mothers. There's Elizabeth, who went through really, really difficult fertility treatments and had a lot of loss. And is still wrestling so much with that, as well as sort of this permanent wound that she carries from being the youngest child in her family, and so always being treated by the youngest child. And so all of the ways that she carries that into her parenting. So yeah, it was interesting trying to think about, because there's a million different kinds of parents and parenting choices, and I had to choose just a few to talk about in this book.
Any Other Family is an intense book at times. That it's full of emotion, and there's a roller coaster journey of ups and downs and trials and tribulations, and the daily challenges of parenting, amplified by this unique situation that they're in. Also sprinkled throughout the book are moments of levity and moments where, after talking to you for a while, I kind of sense your personal sense of humor and your lighthearted way of looking at the world that bleeds into the book in places. Was that ever a conscious effort on your part to say, wow, this has been really intense for a while. I need to lighten the mood a little bit, let the reader off the hook, so to speak, for a minute, so that when the next thing happens, it's more impactful? Or is this just you coming out on the page?
Yes. I was just a little bit of both. So this is a funny story. So when we got blurbs, other author recommendations for the Weird Sisters, sure. One of them, I can't remember the whole quote, but the pull quote that they used for the cover is just hilarious. And I was like, hilarious? This book isn't funny. And then I went out on the road and started doing readings from it. And people were laughing, and I was like, oh, I guess it is funny. And so then with The Light of Paris, which is a heavier book, I intentionally, I did what I called a funny draft, where I went through and sort of tried to punch up the humor in it a lot. And I did that in this one as well. So I gave one of the characters, I gave Elizabeth my sense of humor. And so every time she has a chapter, there's humor in it, because the book alternates sort of between those 3 points of view. And then sometimes I think there's just humor in, because it's so easy to see what other people are doing wrong, you know what I mean? And so there's humor that comes from just looking at the decisions these people are making sometimes, being like, well, that's a lousy idea, Tabitha. So yeah, it was intentional on my part, I think partially because after I realized that the people thought the Weird Sisters was funny, I was like, oh, I guess this is part of the appeal, right? And you always want to try to, Mary Kay Andrews, who's a wonderful writer, yes. Talks about how you always try to, you're like a painter, right? And you're bringing the light and the dark together because they reveal each other. And so that's definitely part of what I had to do here, because there are people who really want to read depressing books, and I'm not one of them. I know everybody loves that book, A Little Life.
Yeah.
And I read a plot summary of it, and I was like, this sounds like the worst way to spend an afternoon. But that's just, and this is why it's so wonderful that there's so much breadth in publishing right now, because there's a book for everybody. I could not handle that, but there are so many people who just love it, and more power to them.
Absolutely. Well, Eleanor, if someone picks up Any Other Family and they fall into the story, when they close that back cover and they finish the book, what do you hope that they're left with?
I really hope that people who read this story are left with an understanding that adoption and adoptive families don't necessarily look the way they thought they did. That they are just as complex and wonderful and painful and beautiful as any other family.
Any Other Family, available everywhere now. When you're hearing this, we're going to put links to it in the show notes to make it easy for you to click over and get it from Amazon in whatever format you prefer best, or go visit your local bookstores. Be sure to support local books, and Any Other Family should be in every bookstore when you're hearing this. Eleanor, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you're up to, where can they find you online?
So they can actually only find me on my website. I am no longer on social media, which I had to do for my own sanity, but
I get it.
But you can go to my website, which is eleanor-brown.com, ELEANOR-brown.com, and kind of poke around there. And as you said, like, if you really want to hang out with me, you can hang out with me in my books, because my sense of humor is always in there.
Excellent. We'll put the link to the website in the show notes. And Eleanor, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today. We're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of Any Other Family.
Thank you so much, Hank. It's great to talk to you.